Good morning and welcome to our last crop hour meeting of this week. Today's February 20th on Thursday. And this week's topics were climate and business management. We saved climate for the end since there were some national climate updates released just this morning. So we wanted to bring the latest and greatest to you hot off the press today. We'll have two presenters today. First will be myself. I'm Laura Edwards. I'm the state climatologist with SDSU Extension based out of the Aberdeen Regional Center. And our second presenter today will be Kevin Lau. He is a hydrologist and engineer with NOAA's National Weather Service with the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center. And so he will be presenting a flood outlook for the spring season in the second half of this hour. We will save the questions for the end of each presentation. It's just kind of hard to manage the Q&A while we're in the middle of a presentation. So when I'm done, we'll look at the Q&A and then again after Kevin's presentation. So please submit those questions as they come to you in that Q&A section. If you have a message to send to us, the hosts and panelists, you can send that in the chat and that will come to myself and Kevin and our other tech support, Candy, who's behind the scenes with us today. So with that, I will share my screen and get going on our first talk for today, which is the climate outlook for the spring and summer season. And I just wanted to start with a couple notable pictures from last year. This is first of all at Sioux Falls at our Mesonet weather station there at the outdoor campus or Sertoma Park area. So really just a stone's throw away from the Big Sioux River. I believe I know Kevin's been at the site when we did a ribbon cutting here a couple of years ago, and this is the peak flooding on January 22nd or around the peak where they had nearly 3 feet of water at the station, and you can see the water coming up to the fence line there. And so that was probably one of the most notable events outside of the ongoing drought that we saw last year. And along with that, just kind of reviewing, it was essentially something of a 1 in 1,000 year probability event. And these were the rainfall totals from that event, just to give you some perspective there. I know there's been a lot of press coverage and a lot of other news. I know it's affected a lot of you in the southeastern corner of the state. And unbelievably, perhaps not the wettest June on record. That was 10 years ago in 2014. Or Canton holds, I believe now, still holds the statewide 1 month total precipitation record for June of 2014. But certainly this one really ranks up there very high and was much more widespread type of event. So hopefully Kevin doesn't have some bad news for us as far as this kind of flooding goes, but certainly this is a very difficult type of event to forecast. But they do their best and they do a very good job over there with the information that they can get. So let's kind of get into kind of where we've been most recently. And I thought I'd recap a little bit about the winter season to start with starting with temperature. Departure from average, or how different from average have we been? This is since November 22nd, so the last 90 days. And all those cool colors, the greens, blues, purples, have all been cooler than average for that last 90 days overall. When you look at the yellows to oranges, a slightly warmer, near average to warmer, so really very isolated areas. Almost everywhere has been colder than average. That's very typical of a wintertime La Nina pattern in South Dakota, where La Nina is often correlated with, or often triggers colder than average temperatures in South Dakota. Historically has not told us a lot about precipitation or snowfall. Maybe leaning a little more on snowfall in some years, but nothing really consistent. But colder than average temperatures are often the hallmark of La Nina and often really punctuated by a very cold February, which is exactly what we've seen here this year. Looking on the precipitation side, again, the last 90 days, so kind of looking at the winter overall so far, very dry conditions, especially in the east and south central part of the state. Some areas still, even in the west, southwest, northwest, a lot of areas are below average. Just those green areas, those green dots, there's a couple blues there that are near average to slightly above. They will be doing a snow survey in the Black Hills area here in the coming week. So we'll have another update there. But last month, a month ago, or at the end of January, they had near average, slightly above average snowpack in the Black Hills. So for those of you who are looking at some of those water sources for irrigation and such. But it looks like it's been a little bit drier since then. So we'll see what the next month report says. But what we would characterize, or what I would characterize on the plains as essentially a snow drought, which doesn't really affect agriculture too much. We like to have some snow cover to help insulate winter wheat and those kinds of things from frost damage. But outside of that, winter is our driest season. Doesn't contribute a lot to the annual total moisture, but it does help, kind of hold snow for water in that snowmelt season. And so that's kind of what we're lacking. But other drought impacts of a snow drought are maybe not ag related, but more like recreation, tourism, as far as snowmobiling goes and other snow sports, those kinds of things that can be affected. So when we're talking about drought, it's not just agriculture related all the time. So speaking of drought, here's the updated U.S. Drought Monitor from this morning with data going through Tuesday of this week and still showing, continued drought across South Dakota. Everywhere in the tan, orange, and red colors is some level of drought from moderate through extreme drought. So that's been pretty consistent story, especially in the West since the summer season. Saw some expansion of drought in the fall due to dry conditions that really was beneficial for harvest, but grain dried down very quick and harvest came out very fast for corn and soybeans. But even since then, we've seen some expansion of drought or changing in drought areas, again, due to the kind of essentially this snow drought or this dry winter season. Here's a close-up of South Dakota at the drought monitor map. Again, 100% of the state in some level of drought, very different than 1 year ago, where we had less than 5% of the state in some level of drought. Even going back to October 1st of last year, started, around the fall season, at that time, only 41% of the state was in some level of drought. So really this has grown in area and more intense in some areas in the last few months, 5 months or so. To kind of tell another piece of the drought story, here in the cold climates, the soil moisture that we end the season with before freeze up is essentially locked in until the spring season. And so this is what we call our poker chip map, looking at soil moisture sensors from the mesonet. Each sensor is reflected by one chip in that stack, with each station measuring at 5 different depths. They're not evenly spaced in real life, but that's how they work out. The deeper ones, they kind of space out as they go deeper in depth in reality. But you kind of get an idea here, with the blues being more, wetter, and then going towards the yellow and then oranges, which are drier. So you kind of see the range of different depths and what kind of soil moisture those stations are reflecting. Not too uncommon and not unusual to see that southeast part of the state have, wetter soils than the rest of us, as our climatology is wetter, more precipitation. But think of it differently in that they were flooded out in mid-June or around the 22nd or so. And then basically the tap shut off. So even to be, in that kind of bright blue color and not totally saturated is pretty remarkable given how much moisture they received in such a short amount of time in June. Well, as you look towards the central and western part of the state, you see a lot of the top chips in these stacks in the yellow color. That's essentially showing a short-term dryness, and that those shallow soils were drying out first. And again, that's a reflection of the dry fall season. Some other stations, particularly in the northwest region, have deeper layers that are also pretty dry in the yellows and oranges in the northwest region. So again, reflecting part of the ongoing or the long-term drought that they had through the summer season and into the fall. So, we're seeing a lot of dry signals across much of the state before we got to freeze up. And here we are. I know Kevin Lau will have a picture of a couple images of frost death, but I wanted to zoom in on South Dakota too, just to show where we're at. Almost everywhere in the state is about 3 to 5 feet of frost at this point, looking at our sensors. I'm sure there are local areas that are deeper than that, but now, again, just coming out of this multi-day cold snap, we're hearing more and more reports of frozen pipes and those kinds of impacts across the state. As far as again, agriculture impacts, it gets into the water sources for livestock or water lines going into fields, those kinds of things, but also household water and municipal or other water supply concerns that we've heard about across the region. So these are the deepest frost depths that we've seen in at least a few years. And this is typically around the time of year where they're about as deep as they get, historically speaking anyway. So crossing fingers that this is about where it ends as far as the depth goes. But time will tell as we have some very deep frost, as you see, some over 60 inches or pushing 60 inches in the north central part of the state. Kind of along with that, and I know this is kind of Kevin's information too, but I wanted to share a kind of a close-up of it, just looking at how much water is on the landscape. And I kind of alluded to this earlier where, saying we have dry soils, we also have very low amount of water in snowpack on the surface. And that's certainly true here. These gray areas, less than an inch of water in the snowpack. If I were to show you a snow depth map, we're seeing basically less than 4 inches, really less than 2 inches of snow across most of these gray areas. So, that's very little snowpack, very little water sitting on the surface, waiting to replenish our soil moisture. Again, the exception is the Black Hills. They often are favored for more snow, and that is the case here. But again, we'll see what their snow report says next week. So all that being said, let's look ahead. That's kind of where we are now, where we've been, where we are. So where are we going? The next 7 days look very dry. This is total precipitation estimate for the next 7 days. Not looking like a lot here. I think more noteworthy will be the temperatures increasing over this time. And so we'll see kind of a hint of spring here by the end of the weekend, early next week. And but not a lot of precipitation to come with that. So still holding on to pretty dry conditions as we get closer to the end of February. And here, I'm sure many of you are looking ahead at least till Sunday, where we see highs in the 50s forecast, 40s, 50s at least in a lot of areas of South Dakota. And it looks like continuing for the end of February, that last part of February to March 1st, warmer than average temperatures are continuing to be favored in that time frame. And that's the map on the left showing the likelihood of warmer than average temperatures. Very high confidence here in South Dakota. Here and then on the right, on the precipitation side, We're kind of in between what could be a more active pattern to the north, northeast of us, and a drier pattern in the west and southwest. So we're kind of squeezed in the middle. Again, in the month of February, we don't typically get too much precipitation, less than an inch in most areas. But as we get into March, that starts ramping up a little bit. And so kind of a tough call for the next week or so as far as precipitation goes, but not seeing a whole lot. Um, Nothing really big sticks out. 8 to 14 days out, so 1 to 2 weeks out. Again, kind of hanging on to odds leaning towards warmer. That's on the left, with a colder signal across the Great Lakes and the eastern third of the country. So again, kind of holding on to some warmer temperatures, but a very strong difference in temperature from west to east right across our area. With precipitation, maybe see some increased chance of precipitation in the west around that same time. This would be the end of February into early March, the first few days of March. In the east part of South Dakota, not a whole lot to say right now. A lot of uncertainty still in that period. And here's kind of the highlight, one of the highlights, at least for today. Look at the March climate outlook, and this is the part that came hot off the press here this morning from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. The temperature and precipitation outlook for March shows a lot of uncertainty, not really honing in on anything either way on temperature or precipitation. I think, as we see these warmer than average temperatures to start the month, if we look out a couple few weeks, I didn't pull any graphics to show that. It does not look like that warm pattern will stay, and we could very well get back into a colder pattern by mid-March. So I think there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of variability, I should say, as we've seen a lot this winter. Going back to February, December, we saw warm and cold and warm and cold and kind of going back and forth. I think that's going to be the story here again in March as far as temperature goes. So kind of a tough call to make if we're going to end up above or below average in the end. On the precipitation side, again, not much to hang our hat on as far as chances going towards wetter or drier. That still shows a very kind of typical La Nina pattern for precipitation from the winter season. And so, again, La Nina and El Nino both, but La Nina doesn't really tell us a lot on precipitation. Tends to favor wetter in the Northwest and the Great Lakes, and drier to our south. So again, I think though, even if we get some near normal precipitation, I think that can help our soil moisture situation and help get us better prepared for spring planting season. I know it's right around the corner. A month or so from now, you could be thinking of getting your small grains in the ground and those early spring crops. So I know that's not too far away, but again, not a lot we could say right now. I always get teased though that we get a blizzard on state B basketball or something like that on tournament weekends. So certainly keep an eye out if you're one of those who think that tournaments bring snowstorms. March through May, the next 3 months, really a very similar pattern, but during this time, La Nina will fade away. Typically in that March to April timeframe, we see dissipation of La Nina-like conditions out in the Pacific Ocean. And so we have less of that influence into our jet stream patterns here in North America. And so that also brings a little more uncertainty with that, where we don't have that kind of signal that we can look at on the seasonal scale, on the multi-month scale. So there's a little flavor of La Nina here still in the spring, March through May outlook, just because we see La Nina still at the start of that period, but it won't be hanging on throughout the whole spring. But here in South Dakota in the Northwest, we do see odds slightly tilted towards colder than average temperatures. in that spring season. And then on the precipitation side on the right, odds leaning slightly towards drier in the southwest. So I know that's an area of the state that got hit by drought pretty hard last year in 2024, especially in the summer. And so certainly that's an area we're keeping an eye on for further degradation or intensification of drought conditions. This doesn't mean to say it's going to be dry the whole season or cold the whole season in the Northwest. Still, I think as we get some soils thawed out in the spring, we can see some improvements in drought conditions, even with near normal precipitation, especially since we're not looking at especially warm temperatures throughout this 3-month season. And so where we are in the drought monitor and the drought situation now could improve even still with near normal conditions in the spring season as soil moisture, as infiltration of water can really be good right at that early part of the season. So looking at this and then hinting out towards the seasonal drought outlook, this was also from the Climate Prediction Center released this morning. They're essentially holding on to persisting drought conditions through the end of May. And the way that this outlook, how they verify it, is looking at today's drought monitor, U.S. drought monitor, and then look at the drought monitor that's closest to the end of May 31st. So that's not to say we can't see ups and downs in between. They just look at those two outlooks or those two drought monitor maps to see if things got better, worse, or stayed the same. So again, I think we can see some improvements, but potentially we could be seeing some drier conditions return in that late spring, early summer season. Now that brings me to the last map that I'm going to share with you today, which is the temperature and precipitation outlooks for June, July, and August for that 3-month period altogether. And here, this is what's a little more concerning, even more than the spring outlook, where we see warmer than average temperatures favored across most of South Dakota and combined with drier than average conditions all across the state, all across the region. And the one on the right, the precipitation outlook hinting towards drier in this midsummer season, has been pretty consistent the last few months. And there's a fair bit of consensus in the long-term climate, the models that are hinting towards this drier pattern. Temperature is a little more iffy, but there are a number of hints towards warmer as well. And when we see dry conditions in the summer, it's almost always accompanied by heat. It's very rare to have a cool drought in our summer season. So just thinking ahead, as you're thinking of your own farm, advising clients or what have you, that what you do now, think of your inputs, think of what your soil water management is looking like, your tillage situation, cover crops, maybe you want to terminate a little early, those kinds of things to manage your water resources for potential dryness, drought in that summer season. And again, we don't have high confidence at this point, but odds have been tilting this way for quite some time. And not to say we can't see some ups and downs, a timely rain, and we just hope that we don't see the worst of this, of heat or dryness, say right at pollination, grain fill, pod fill, those kinds of time periods, because I know those are more critical. So the day-to-day, the week-to-week can still hold a lot of variability, even if we're warmer and drier overall. So with that, I wanted to share a little bit about the Mesonet, just to give you a quick update in my last couple of minutes here. This is a map of all the weather stations that have been installed through last year. They take a break in the wintertime, of course. Nearly 100 stations are in the ground across the state, and they have plans for another 29 or so, 25 to 30 for this year again. So They have about 2 more seasons left of work to get to their goal of just over 150 stations all across the upper Missouri Basin. And so take a look. If one of these is in your neighborhood, they're spaced about 40 to 50 miles apart. So the closest you'll get probably is within 20 to 25 miles. But even then, that's really, really great coverage for a network like this, of this kind of high quality weather equipment. This is what one of the stations look like. This is the example at Volga Field Station last summer. 5-minute live data with wind speed, air temperature, pressure, precipitation, even in the wintertime. They're melting the snow. Any frozen precipitation is melted and measured as total liquid. Soil temperature and moisture. I showed the temperatures and moisture a little bit ago with the frost depth and that poker chip map. We also, if you use pesticide on your farm, we also have inversion temperature at both two. We have 2 additional thermometers specifically for that, and a tool specifically for pesticide spray applications. So take a look at that. And we have weather cameras on all the stations as well. Going back to the first picture I showed from Sioux Falls with the flooding there. Wanted to say too, they are still looking for some more station hosts to kind of fill out the remainder of their network. All these areas in blue still need to be filled. So if you, friend, neighbor, coworker, someone you know is interested in hosting a weather station, please reach out to the Mesonet crew. Their website's there, mesonet.sdstate.edu/host is the website specifically for station hosting. Reach out to them if you have a question, you want to know if you might be in the area of interest, and they'd love to visit with you. And just since we've been in some cold weather lately, I know we're kind of coming out of it, and this isn't really crop related, but livestock stress has been a hot topic lately, pun intended, with calving season right here. And so we have this livestock stress tool on the Mesonet website using the comprehensive cattle index. We worked with Dr. Warren Rushi to pull this tool together. This was the comprehensive cattle index for newborn livestock this morning, just a little bit before the webinar started. So you can kind of see where we're at as far as that index goes, certainly in the extreme category. You can also look at the comprehensive cattle index for adult livestock, the wind chill or heat index if you look at a heat stress on the alternate side, and then straight up temperature and a temperature humidity index. So if you happen to have a loss of cattle, you need to fill out an indemnity claim, those kinds of things. Please do come back and look at the data, look at the history. We've worked with FSA to try to get the information out here that you all need for that. We also have a forecast part of it. So you can look at historically, that's a jagged line. This is the newborn category at the top and the adult category at the bottom from Mound City from this morning. So you see the historical index for a comprehensive climate index, and you can see kind of a forecast where it's going or predicted to go. So things look to be improving for sure in the next couple days. So I think I said everything I need to say here for today. I don't see that the deep frost is really going to cause too many issues for planting. That can come out really quick if we get a good, strong, warm stretch, say late March, early April. That frost can come out pretty quick, even mid-April. And so I'm not too worried about that frost depth. At this point, it's more the damage it's doing here in the winter season. With that, I'll put my information up, and I believe my email is also in the chat box, so you can reach out to me there as well. If there are any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat, and we can check those out as we go. Thank you for listening to my little talk today. And Kevin, if you want to start loading your presentation while we wait for any questions to show in the Q&A. I can see your slides, Kevin. There you are. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but feel free to write something in either related to my talk or Kevin's talk here in the last half hour. Again, Kevin Lau is a hydrologist and engineer with the National Weather Service's Missouri Basin River Forecast Center out of Kansas City. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us. I know you've been with us the last few years since we've been doing Crop Hour to talk about the flood outlook, and we haven't had much flooding lately, so we'll cross fingers for a good message here today. So take it away.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, it's a pleasure to be with everyone this morning. I thank Laura and company for inviting me to come back. So overall, we are saying that for this year, the flood risk for this spring is lower than normal for much of the Missouri River Basin. Every month, and sometimes more often, we are in the spring outlook season. So we run this every couple of weeks in February and March, but at least once per month, we make a long-range river outlook to determine the flood risk. And that goes out 3 months. And we look at the 400 plus locations that we monitor across the basin when we do this. Based upon today's hydrologic conditions, and when we say that, we mean soil moisture, snowpack, reservoir capacities. We make a run going out 3 months or 90 days. And if the probability for flooding is exceeds 50%, then we say that location is likely to flood over the next 90 days. We don't say when, but the probability is that location will go to flood within the next 3 months. And then we create map or graphics, just like the one you see on the right-hand side here. We create these graphics for all 400 locations. And you can go on the internet and see these. Now, it's a little confusing maybe if you haven't studied these before. So I'm going to take you through this a little bit to kind of explain why we are saying there's a reduced flood risk for this year. So there's 2 lines on all of these 400 graphics. Again, this is the probability going out 90 days. The black line is today's conditions, given today's soil conditions, soil moisture, snowpack, reservoir holdings, all of that goes into that black line for today's condition. And the example shown here is the James River at Stratford. It's valid for the next 90 days, well, actually a few days ago. So it's February the 15th through May 16th. So that for that 3-month period. And the black line you'll see crosses flood stage, or 14 feet, at 36%. 36%. So we're saying that over the next 90 days, the James River at Stratford has a 36% chance of going above flood stage. Now, if we look back over the history, the period of record, well, actually the last 30 years, if we look at the last 30 years, then that's how we get that blue line. Again, it's the last 30 years for the mid-February through mid-May time period for each of the past 30 years. If we look at that, then we see that the risk for flooding historically is about 54%. So Stratford historically for this time of year, mid-February through mid-May, usually has a 54%, better than a 50-50 chance of seeing flooding. So for this year, since we're saying there's only a 36%, we see that there's a decrease in flood potential of about 18%. Okay, 18%. Now, this reduction in flood risk not the amount, not the 18%, but this general rule of reduction in flood risk carries over across much of the basin. And that is depicted on the left side of this slide. The left-hand graphic depicts all the reaches of rivers that we monitor across the basin, and gives the departure from normal, if you will, the reduction. That's what the blue colors mean, based on how big a percentage. So you can see that for many reaches in the basin, there is an anywhere from a 10 to a 30% reduction, some even more than that, across the basin. And so that's why we're saying that for this year, we have a reduced flood risk. And I'll go into why that is here over the next few slides. South Dakota, for instance, almost every reach has a reduced flood risk. The Grand River, the Moreau, the Cheyenne, the Belle Fourche, the Bad, the White, the James, the Big Sioux, all of those have a reduced flood risk this year. So anyway, enough laboring that point. Okay, so why do we have a reduced flood risk? And some of this is going to be a repeat of what Laura has already given us. But this slide looks at a couple of different soil moisture indices. Both of these graphics are based on models. They're influenced to one degree or another by real data. But basically, these are model outputs. And to piggyback on what Laura, how she finished up her talk, talking about the new or the expanded South Dakota Mesonet, and that's a part of the expansion across the entire upper Missouri Basin. Our office is looking forward to seeing the full complement of these weather stations being deployed. I think there's something like 540 locations across the upper Missouri Basin, and we're working hard with our models to be able to correctly interpret those real-time observations. So hopefully we'll get to a day when I don't have to present maps like this. We'll actually have maps that have real data completely on them. But that day is not here yet. So we have to use maps like these to kind of indicate where we are with the soil moisture. So again, the picture that both of these models, these different models, are painting is that soil moisture is quite dry across the entire Missouri River Basin. And one of the reasons for this is temperature. Calendar year 2024 was the warmest year on record for the U.S., for the continental U.S. It was the second warmest year out of 130 years. It was the second warmest year, calendar year 2024, for the Missouri Basin. So that, of course, drives evaporation and evapotranspiration. So temperature is one. It's not just the rain or lack of rain, but temperatures lead to depletion of soil moisture. As Laura mentioned, the U.S. Drought Monitor was updated today, or was released today anyway. It was based on data from a couple of days ago. It shows that 64% of the Missouri River Basin is in drought. And as she said, 100% of the state of South Dakota is categorized as being in drought. And to be honest, we made a good run last year at coming out of drought. In fact, in June of 2024, less than 10% of the Missouri River Basin was in drought. But then things have deteriorated quite rapidly since June of last year. And so that finds us back again in the 60s percent of our basin as being in drought. Okay. Again, we saw some of this with Laura's slides, but looking at frost depths primarily with this, because that drives flood risk. Frost depths indirectly drive flood risk for the spring. We started winter kind of warm, but January and now February has been, bitterly cold. So we've really developed of late some really impressive frost depths. The question here, at least for my office, is was there enough moisture in the ground to lock it in, if you will, when it started getting cold? So yeah, we're cold. The ground is frozen, very deep. But even frozen ground, cold ground, can absorb runoff from snow melt or rain if it's not locked, if the soil moisture is not locked in. So that's the big question for us anyway, for our office is, is the ground like concrete? And we rely a lot on just eyewitness, excavators, that kind of thing, people doing construction. We covet receiving reports, just how frozen is the ground, how hard is the ground. So if the ground truly is, if there's enough moisture to prevent percolation of whatever runoff we will see, that will increase the flood risk. Okay, mountain snows. Mountain snows have improved somewhat over the past few weeks. We were running below average in the mountain snow. So this graphic is courtesy of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It shows the mountain snowpack in terms of percent of the 30-year average, percent of normal snowpack as far as the liquid amount in that snow go. So this is snow water equivalent, and it's in percent of the 30-year average. And right now you see that most of the mountainous west is pretty close to being average. I would dismiss the Milk River. I think that's there's very few observations up there, so I've seen it kind of tend high as far as what really means. But basically the mountain snow is about average for this year. So that's good. That's good for water supply. We do not believe that mountain snow melt will lead to flooding itself. It would have to be combined with a rain event for any particular location in the mountains to exceed flood stage. So a normal mountain snowpack is a good thing and is really not a flood hazard. So that snowpack and soil moisture conditions kind of play into this next slide. So the National Weather Service, just like the Natural Resources Conservation Service, we issue what's called a water supply forecast. It's a volume that we expect to pass a location, a given gauge. It's the volume that would pass it between April and September. So it's a April through September volume. And so what, the mountain snowpack is a direct driver to this, but also other conditions affect, just how much the mountain snow will actually run off. And so as you can see here, we're looking at, for most of the 50, 60 locations that we issue this April through September forecast for, it's the runoff we expect to be below average. Probably for most of these dots, for most of these locations, we're looking at somewhere between 50 to 75% of the mountain runoff, the normal mountain runoff. So again, we don't expect that the mountain runoff, once it does hit the system, the Missouri River system, won't cause flooding downstream either. So that's sort of the import of this slide. Plain snowpack again. I'm repeating some of what Laura has already said. Plain snowpack is widespread. That's depicted on this left-hand side, but it's shallow. All that gray area there is 1 inch of water or less. So plains snowpack is wanting, with the exception of there's some locations there in Wyoming and Montana that have a pretty good snowpack. The Upper James has some decent snows, but overall, plain snowpack is not expected to be a factor again this year for runoff. With the flip side is, as Laura mentioned, without the snowpack as an insulative cover, the ground has been allowed to deeply freeze. So that could actually exacerbate runoff, but again, we don't know exactly how porous the ground remains. So basically, plain snowpack is not believed to be a factor for this year's flood risk. The right-hand side here is, a plain snowpack, especially for the lower basin, kind of comes and goes. It's transient, right? It melts off and then comes again. So I like to use this left-hand side to kind of tell me overall, how's the plain snow been the entire water year. So this is the accumulated snow depth since October 1. So for the entire water year. And again, it's showing a woefully woeful lack of plain snow for this season. Okay, so this is the slide that all of what I've said up till now kind of boils down to. This is a slide of the results from our latest 3-month outlook that we ran with our river model. And this slide shows the 400 plus locations, little dots, and based on the color of the dot is the probability that that location would see flooding over the next 90 days or next 3 months. Green dots indicate a less than 50% chance of flooding. Orange dots indicate a better than 50% chance for minor flooding, and red dots or squares indicate a better than 50% chance for moderate level flooding. You see no purple, so we're not expecting any major flooding anywhere. But for the next 3 months, you can see that the probability or likelihood of seeing flooding is limited to the very lower portion of the basin, eastern Kansas, and across the state of Missouri. Everywhere else has a less than 50-50 chance of seeing flooding between now and mid-May. We'll run this again next week and in 2 weeks after that as well. And the number of dots will expand in the lower basin because as that 90-day window kind of rose further into spring, then more and more locations will start popping its colors because we get into more and more thunderstorm activity season. And that's what really drives the flood potential in the lower basin is the flood potential or is the thunderstorm activity. This does include these dots, even though you can't see it. This does include the Missouri River itself below Kansas City. We are outlooking the likelihood of minor flooding below Kansas City to the mouth at St. Louis. And this is really typical for this time of year. Flooding in the lower basin is typical regardless of how dry it can be or how dry it is, because it really is rain-driven, intense rain-driven. In fact, we've already had flooding in the southern part of the basin the 1st of February, just 18 days ago or whatever. We had 3 smaller tributaries to the Missouri, 1 in Kansas, 2 in Missouri, that went above flood stage simply because we had a couple of inches of rain on top of it. So this is not atypical for this year. Again, no flooding in the state of South Dakota for the next 3 months. At least that's what we don't believe that. Okay, so for my wrap up, overall spring flood risk for the entire Missouri Basin is lower than normal. Mountain snowpack, I should have corrected that. Mountain snowpack is near normal right now. We are about 75%, about 3/4 of our way through the normal accumulating season for the mountains. So we still have 25% of the season left. So things could change in the mountains, and we've seen that change over the past couple of weeks. We've gotten some good snows. So, it's still somewhat up in the air. Plain snowpack, again, is widespread, but very shallow, not expected to be a factor in this year's flood potential. Again, the frost steps, that's the big thing. Is the ground like concrete, or does it still have the capacity, even though it's below 32, does it have the capacity to soak in runoff if we ever get any runoff? Ice jam breakup, we're saying, is low this year, mainly because of the plain snowpack, the lack of that, to run off. The rivers have been really low. So yeah, there's ice in the rivers, of course, but they weren't frozen in at a high stage. So, but we do caution and say that wherever river ice does remain, there is a risk for ice jamming, flooding. So even though the risk is low, it still poses some risk. Flood potential in the mountains, none. Flood potential in the northern plains, none. Flood potential in the lower basin is typical. We'll have some episodic, minor to moderate level flooding on again, off again in the lower basin, including the Missouri River downstream of Kansas City. And I think that is it. So thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Glenn. We'll take any questions in the Q&A now, if there are any from the audience. Kevin, just back to your soil moisture question about the frozen soils. What I've heard kind of anecdotally is that they're pretty dry. And I wonder too if that has contributed to the very deep frost steps that we're seeing right now. I don't know, and I've heard that from North Dakota too. So I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Well, that's kind of information that we need here. Is like those who work in cemeteries and so forth, are they having a hard time excavating? That's the sort of data. So that's sort of what we're banking on here, is that the soils can take some of that runoff, that it's not going to be like asphalt.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, at least earlier in the earlier frost season, we were having those conversations in North Dakota, how quickly it was freezing, in the early part of the season, the first cold snap. Candy, you can share the poll if we have one. I think we have one for this session. And a reminder to everybody too, this will be posted on YouTube on the SDSU Extension Crop Hour channel under 2025, of course. So please feel free to share this with others, as that will get posted here usually pretty quick, within a day or so. And we appreciate your response to the poll. Just to give us a little feedback on the session today. You may receive email to respond to another kind of survey or poll about the crop hour sessions, as we're always looking for feedback on the program overall and in the individual program as well. So let's see, one question in the Q&A. Kevin, this might be a question that maybe you could help answer too. In the Q&A, I would love to better understand the conditions in which frozen soils are more or less able to absorb moisture.
Sure. So let's say that there was a rain event or a snow melt, and so the top layer of the soil, top few inches, were really moist, and then all of a sudden temperatures dropped and it froze that in. So the top couple of inches is like an ice cube. If we get a rapid warm up, snow melt, or let's say there's snow on top of it, or a rain event becomes, well, that rain can't go through the ice lens, if you will, that has formed. And so all the runoff would come off like a parking lot. But if it's just cold, if the soil is cold, but the pores in the soil aren't, doesn't have ice in it, then even though the soil is cold, the runoff, the rain or the snow melt, can go down into the soil as opposed to running off the surface of the soil. So that's the question. That's the wild card, if you will. When we do have a runoff event, snow melt or rain later, March or April, will it be able to go down through the soil, or will it all just run off? And so if there's that ice that has formed within the top few inches of the soil, there's an ice barrier, if you will, then that's what throws us for a loop. And that's what happened. If you remember back to March of 2019, kind of south of you guys, but in 2019, that's exactly what happened. And we had runoff efficiency of like 85%. 85% of the rain and the snow melt actually went to the river, as opposed to normally we only see like 15% of a rainfall event or snow melt actually making it into the river. The rest of it goes into the soil. But March 2019 was the perfect storm, if you will, with regard to the frozen soil. The runoff had nowhere to go but to run off the land. So that's a very long answer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Danelle, thanks you for the answer. Just thought that was very helpful. Thanks. Good job. All right. We'll leave the Q&A open. We'll leave the webinar and the Q&A open here for another minute or so. I'd like to thank Kevin for being a part of this crop hour for the last 2 years since we started it, kind of during the COVID era. And we haven't seen much flooding since then, so hopefully you're a good luck charm, and don't see too much spring flooding here this year. So, but as you say, that thunderstorm activity is a wild card, and that's what happened last year in June when we get to that warm season. Okay, well, I think we'll close up the webinar for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. For next week's topic is regenerative agriculture, and again, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 10 a.m. Central. So, oh, one last question here, Kevin, in the chat. To what degree might field, I'm gonna say tiling, affect flooding and soil moisture data? So when they, install those tile drains in the ag field, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, my opinion would be is that it does increase flood risk. Those areas that have been heavily tiled, that infiltrated runoff gets to the ditches, the streams, and the rivers that much faster. So tiling does, in my opinion, increase runoff and hence flooding.
Yeah, kind of speeds up that cycle rather than slower infiltration through the system. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you for that question, Robert. So, all right. Well, again, thank you again today. And feel free to contact Kevin or myself if you have any questions after the webinar. Have a great weekend.